In the summer of 1876, the United States of America was preparing to celebrate its 100th birthday. It was a time of grand exhibitions, national pride, and the belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the nation was destined to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But in the remote plains of the Montana Territory, that destiny collided with a stone wall of resistance. On June 25th, a brash and ambitious lieutenant colonel named George Armstrong Custer led 700 men of the famous 7th Cavalry into the valley of the Little Bighorn River. By sunset the next day, Custer and 268 of his soldiers were dead. It was the most catastrophic defeat the United States Army would suffer in its long wars against the native peoples of the plains. The man most responsible for this stunning victory was not a general in the European tradition. He was a quiet, visionary warrior of the Oglala Lakota Sioux, a man who led not by shouting orders, but by silent example. His name was Crazy Horse. To this day, he remains one of the most enigmatic and revered figures in American history, a freedom fighter who stood against an empire and won the single greatest battle of the Indian Wars. This is the story of the man, the battle, and the legend. He was born sometime between 1840 and 1842 near Rapid Creek in the Black Hills of South Dakota, a range of mountains the Lakota call Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. His birth name was Chang-O-Hang, meaning among the trees, but everyone called him Curly or light hair, because, unlike most of his people, he had fair skin and wavy brown hair. Even as a child, he was different, quiet, introspective, and distant. When Curly was about 4 years old, his mother, Rattling Blanket Woman, died. He was raised by his father, also named Crazy Horse, a respected medicine man. And his aunt, he grew up watching the world of his people begin to change. Wagon trains full of white settlers were starting to creep across the plains, and with them came disease and soldiers. The defining moment of his youth came in August 1854. A cow wandered away from a Mormon wagon train and was killed and eaten by a starving Miniconjou visitor to a Sioux camp. When a young, inexperienced lieutenant named John Grattan marched into the camp with 30 soldiers to arrest the man, the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Grattan shot and killed Chief Conquering Bear. In an instant, the Sioux warriors retaliated, wiping out Grattan and all his men. Young Curly was there. He saw the soldiers fall. He saw the power of his people when they united, but he also knew that the Bluecoats would return with a terrible vengeance. Soon after, following the ways of his people, he went into the mountains alone to seek a vision. He fasted and prayed for days. The vision that came to him would guide the rest of his life. In his dream, he saw a warrior on horseback, riding out of a lake. The horse danced and floated as if made of shadow. Bullets and arrows flew through the air, but they passed around the rider without touching him or his horse. A red-tailed hawk flew overhead, crying out. The warrior had a lightning bolt painted on his cheek and hailstones on his chest. The vision told him that as long as he never took anything for himself, never wore a war bonnet, and never took scalps, he would be protected in battle. When he returned, his father gave him a new name, passing on his own, Tatasunke Witko. It is usually translated as Crazy Horse, but it means something more like his horse's spirit or his horse is inspired. The quiet boy was gone. The warrior had arrived. As the 1860s dawned, the pressure on the Lakota lands intensified. Gold was discovered in Montana, and the U.S. government carved the Bozeman Trail directly through the heart of prime hunting territory. In response, the great Oglala chief Red Cloud went to war. Crazy Horse quickly proved himself to be a tactical genius. He wasn't just a brave fighter, he was a master of maneuver. In 1866, during the Fetterman fight near Fort Phil Kearny, Crazy Horse acted as a decoy. He and a few other warriors lured the gullible Captain William Fetterman and his 80 soldiers into a trap, leading them over a ridge where 2,000 hidden warriors waited. Not a single soldier survived. For his courage, Crazy Horse was named a shirt wearer, one of the elite leaders responsible for the welfare of the entire band. But the role came with responsibilities he struggled to keep. Lakota society demanded that its leaders put the tribe above all else. But Crazy Horse's heart belonged to a woman named Black Buffalo Woman. When she married another man, he ran away with her anyway. Her husband, seeking revenge, shot Crazy Horse in the face with a pistol, leaving a scar that he would carry for the rest of his life. The scandal cost him his position as a shirt wearer. Despite this personal turmoil, his reputation as a warrior only grew. He refused to sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, which created the Great Sioux Reservation. He would not be penned in. While other leaders moved to the agencies, Crazy Horse led his band into the unceded territory, the wild country of the Powder River and the Bighorn Mountains, where a man could still be free. By 1876, the situation had reached a breaking point. In 1874, Custer himself had led an expedition into the Black Hills and confirmed the presence of gold. Prospectors flooded in, violating the treaty. The U.S. government, under President Ulysses S. Grant, issued an ultimatum. All Lakota and Northern Cheyenne must report to the reservations by January 31, 1876, or be considered hostiles. Crazy Horse and the Hunkpapa Holy Man Sitting Bull ignored the order. That spring, thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho gathered in a massive camp along the Rosebud River in Montana. It was one of the largest assemblies of Plains Indians in history. There, Sitting Bull performed the sun dance, cutting 100 pieces of flesh from his arms as a sacrifice. In his trance, he had a vision. He saw soldiers falling upside down into the camp, their hats tumbling to the ground. It was a prophecy of a great victory. They knew the army would come. They just didn't know when. On June 17th, General George Crook marched north with over 1,000 men, intending to strike the village. Crazy Horse, along with Cheyenne allies, intercepted him at the Battle of the Rosebud. In a fierce all-day fight, Crazy Horse's warriors fought Crook to a standstill, forcing him to retreat. The way was now clear for the soldiers to come, but Crook wouldn't be one of them. The village, flushed with victory, moved to the valley of the greasy grass, the Little Bighorn River. Meanwhile, another column was approaching. General Alfred Terry sent the 7th Cavalry under George Armstrong Custer to locate the village. Custer was a man in a hurry. He was a glory hunter, a Civil War hero with presidential ambitions, and he was hungry for one more triumph to cement his legacy. On the morning of June 25th, Custer's Crow Scouts located the village. It was enormous. Stretching for nearly 3 miles along the river, it contained perhaps 7,000 to 8,000 people, with 1,500 to 2,500 warriors. The scouts warned Custer it was too big to attack. But Custer, arrogant and overconfident, famously replied, "I guess we'll take them." He made a fatal error. He divided his 600-man regiment into 3 battalions. He sent Captain Frederick Benteen to the south to scout. He ordered Major Marcus Reno to charge straight into the southern end of the village. Custer himself took 210 men and swung to the north, planning to hit the village from the rear and capture the women and children, forcing the warriors to surrender. It was a classic pincer movement, but Custer had no idea who he was facing. Reno's attack began well, but as soon as he crossed the river, he saw the truth. Instead of a fleeing village, he was met by a swarm of warriors led by Chief Ball. The Lakota and Cheyenne were not running, they were fighting. Reno, his men taking heavy casualties, panicked and ordered a retreat into the timber along the river. It turned into a rout. Meanwhile, Custer rode along the bluffs, waving his hat, trying to signal his support. He reached a ridge now known as Custer Ridge and looked down. He expected to see a village in chaos. Instead, he saw thousands of warriors boiling out of the teepees, heading straight for him. Crazy Horse had been with his family when the shooting started. He calmly told his wife, "I must go and fight." He painted himself with a lightning bolt on his cheek and a handful of white hailstones on his chest, just as his vision had instructed. He tied a single eagle feather in his hair and tucked a small brown stone behind his ear for protection. As he rode toward the sound of the guns, he saw Custer's command trying to descend to the river. In that moment, Crazy Horse saw the enemy's weakness. He rallied a large force of warriors and led a massive charge that swept around Custer's flank, cutting him off from the river and any hope of escape. The warriors later described it as a whirlwind. The soldiers dismounted to fight, but their horses were spooked. The bluecoats formed a skirmish line, then another, and finally a tight knot on the ridge. But there was no cover, and the warriors were everywhere. They rode in circles around the desperate soldiers, using their horses as shields and picking off the men with rifles and arrows. The fight lasted less than an hour. The last stand was a scene of utter chaos. Warriors later recounted that Crazy Horse rode among them, not taking any scalps, just pointing and directing the destruction. When it was over, the bodies of 210 soldiers lay scattered along the ridge. Custer himself was dead, his body not mutilated out of respect by the Cheyenne, who saw him as a fallen warrior. Crazy Horse had fulfilled his vision. He had walked through the hail of bullets and emerged untouched. The victory at the Little Bighorn was the high point of resistance, but it was also the beginning of the end. The news of Custer's defeat shocked the nation during its centennial celebration. The Army's response was swift and brutal. They poured men and resources into the plains and pursued the hostiles relentlessly through the winter. Crazy Horse fought on, leading his people through the snow and cold. But on January 8, 1877, at the Battle of Wolf Mountain, Colonel Nelson Miles fought Crazy Horse to a draw in a blizzard. The people were freezing and starving. They couldn't run much longer. On May 6, 1877, Crazy Horse led his worn-out band to Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and surrendered. He was one of the last major leaders to do so. The peace did not last. Rumors, spread by jealous rivals and nervous officers, swirled that Crazy Horse was planning to break out and return to war. On September 5, 1877, he was led toward the guardhouse at Fort Robinson. When he realized he was being imprisoned, he struggled. As his friend, the warrior Little Big Man, tried to hold his arms, a soldier lunged with a bayonet and stabbed Crazy Horse in the back. He died that night, with his father singing the death song over him. Crazy Horse was only about 35 years old. He never signed a treaty, never allowed his photograph to be taken, and never lived on a reservation. In an era of broken promises, he was the one promise that was never broken. Today, a massive monument is being carved in his honor in the Black Hills, a testament to a man who fought and died so his people could remain free. He was, as the Lakota say, a strange man, a loner, a visionary, and the greatest warrior of his generation. In one afternoon on the greasy grass, he did what no other native leader had done. He destroyed an entire battalion of the United States Army, and in doing so, he earned his place as an eternal symbol of resistance.